What I want to do right now is bring in Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, former IDF spokesperson, the Israel Defense Forces, also a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and co-founder of Bottom Line Media, as we discuss everything here. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here.
Thank you, and my pleasure to be on.
And first off, I wanted to start by kind of asking you about this military campaign in general, because there were no leaks as far as we know. A lot of people knew this could potentially happen at some point. But when you hear that the U.S. and Israel have worked together to strike Iran, what's going through your mind as somebody who has been following all of this?
Well, I think that what we're seeing, and good morning or a very good late night for Americans, what we're seeing is possibly a historic moment in the history of the Middle East. We're seeing the US and Israel conducting a joint strike against the Iranian regime with the outspoken aim of either severely limiting or striking the regime, or actually bringing about its downfall. That is what we're seeing, and it comes in the context of about 35 years of indirect war by the Iranian regime against Israel, of thousands, if not millions of times that the Iranian regime and people have chanted death to America and death to Israel and acted on those threats. And it comes after negotiations, real, honest negotiations on behalf of the US and the world with the Iranian regime have failed, and the Iranian regime failing to actually budge and really relinquish their aspiration for weapons of mass destruction. And now Israel and the US have taken action about almost 2 months after the American president promised the Iranian people that help is on the way. It appears now that help has indeed arrived. And President Trump, in his recorded statement, tells the Iranian people to stay in safe locations, but eventually that they will be able to reclaim their country from this oppressive and brutal regime that has controlled the Iranian people for the last 47 years. What I see currently is the Iranian regime trying to fire, trying to lash out in the region. They have hit targets or they're fired at targets in Israel, Jordan, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. Still unconfirmed reports whether or not they've fired on Saudi Arabia. That seems quite desperate. They've fired quite a lot of missiles with very limited impact. All of the missiles that have been fired at Israel have not been effective, and there are so far, thankfully, no casualties in Israel. I suppose that will change, and I suppose the Iranians will fire more and more missiles, and eventually some of them will get through. But currently, no damage in Israel. And I'm very happy to say that so far, in terms of the safety and well-being of American and Israeli airmen or crew, everything seems to be going okay. Last word about targets and BDA. It is still unclear. We don't have confirmed reports on the ground, but I hear early assessments by Israeli officials that at least some of the political and military leaders that were targeted in the first salvo against the Iranian regime were indeed hit. But we'll have to wait and see exactly whom. The Iranians have said that the so-called supreme leader is safe, and they have also said that the foreign minister is safe. We don't know about the commanders of the IRGC. We still don't know about the very important advisor to the supreme leader, Larijani, if he is okay. There are a lot of targets there. Pezeshkian, the president, he was also targeted, I assume, and it's still unclear exactly the results. But historic times, and I think the early seeds of hope for the Iranian people.
One thing I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that Iran has essentially said the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is alive at this point. Is Iran's word trustworthy? Would they tell everyone if the supreme leader had been taken out in these strikes?
No, I don't think that they would, because of the sensitivity and how much they understand that the life and well-being of the so-called supreme leader is very symbolic and important for the stability of the regime. I would assume that even if he had been eliminated, they would try to present a false pretense or false stage as if he was alive until they could find a suitable succession and until they could, stabilize the regime. They would not want to admit that the supreme leader had been taken out before they're able to get their hands on the situation and present some kind of an alternative. But that is still too early to assess. We don't have any strong Israeli or American intel that suggests that he was indeed taken out. But I can assure you that all sensors are looking at that as we speak.
Do you think there's still a chance for these nuclear talks to go somewhere? Are they over for now after this military campaign?
No, I don't think that they are over. And I think that the option is definitely still there for the Iranian regime to change and to say, okay, we get it. We understand that the path that we have been going down for the last 47 years is a disastrous one. A disaster for the Iranian people, disaster for the Iranian country. It's a bad thing for the region. It's been very negative for Iraq, Yemen, for Lebanon, for Gaza, and many other places where the Iranians have been meddling. Of course, they still have the option to change their ways. If they do so and say, we are not going to try to enrich anything on Iranian soil. We're going to stop funding terror organizations all across the Middle East and the world, and we're going to stop to aspire to, bring death to America and death to Israel. I'm sure that negotiations could return very quickly, and I think that positive things would happen. The chances of that happening with this fundamentalist regime, I think, are very limited. So I think that the Western willingness is there. I don't think that the Iranian regime will have the foresight to actually do so. It's much more, for me, it's much more likely that they will try to bring all of Iran down with the regime, even though they may know that it's futile and they're facing very, very difficult military odds.
What do you think are the primary objectives here? Are the U.S. and Israel trying to take out the supreme leader, the president, the foreign minister, or are they simply trying to get Iran to agree to a deal and get rid of its nuclear weapons? Do we know what the true mission here is?
At this stage, I think it is still open in the sense that that what Israel and the US have done is to use kinetic force in order to apply pressure on the regime. At this stage, it's still difficult to understand what the ultimate goal is. I think that if the Iranian regime, as I said before, were to totally change its ways, stop oppressing the people, the Iranian people, stop funding terrorism, stop trying to develop nuclear weapons, then neither Israel nor the US would have any big issue with the existence of the regime. But since that isn't the case, and the Iranian regime is steadfast in its efforts to develop nuclear weapons, to continue to fund terror against American and Israeli and Western targets, and to destabilize the Middle East, since that probably isn't going to change, one assessment is that the real objective, the ultimate objective, is actually to bring down the Iranian regime, understanding that they're not going to change.
Iran has essentially vowed retaliation. They put out several statements saying they will defend their homeland, a lot of other statements coming in from the foreign minister. How credible is that retaliation is or will happen?
Well, it's already happening, and Iran has fired all across the Middle East, various American and other targets in the Middle East, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in the UAE, and Jordan, maybe also in Saudi Arabia, still unconfirmed. So we see the Iranians doing that with very little impact so far, but the Iranians are definitely lashing out. So far, we have not seen other Iranian proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon, like the Houthis in Yemen, get involved into the fighting, and one could definitely hope that they will stay out of it. I think the Lebanese prime minister, the democratically elected prime minister in Lebanon, has issued a very clear warning to the Iranian proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon, telling them, you do not have a mandate and you do not have the legitimacy to drag Lebanon into a war at the behest of any foreign government, meaning Iran. So I hope that Lebanese Hezbollah listens to that warning and that they stay out. If they don't, I think the consequences for them and for Lebanon could be quite disastrous, and I really hope that we can prevent that from happening. But the Iranians, the regime, appears quite desperate and is so far enacting on its threats and firing all across the Middle East.
When we talk about the Iranian regime that's currently in place, if the regime is to be out of power, to either give up power or be taken out, as we keep saying, what kind of influence or impact could that potentially have on the Iranian people and the region as a whole?
Well, the Iranian people has been asking and begging for exactly this to happen for many, many years. But specifically, a little bit more than 50 days ago, millions, tens of millions of Iranians took to the street with the clear, outspoken goal of bringing down the regime and getting back their freedoms. They were brutally murdered by the Iranian regime, mowed down on the streets, either by mercenaries or by the IRGC or the Basij or other Iranian regime security forces. And anywhere between 32 and 40,000 Iranian civilians were murdered by the regime. And even though the people in Iran understand that that is the danger that they face, for the last week, they have been out on Iranian streets nevertheless, across campuses, different universities in Iran, various cities. They have been out demonstrating, clearly saying, down with the dictator and we want our freedom. And finally, the Iranian people is getting the kind of outside help that they wanted, that so many previous American administrations failed to deliver on, talking about how evil the Iranian regime is, how oppressive and horrible and terror supporting and warmongering it is. That has been, a popular talking point for many years, but very little action has been taken up until now by US President Trump, who actually has said help is on the way, and now that is exactly what the Iranian people has received. What can happen is a lot of positive things. I think we should be honest and understand that the first stage will probably be tumultuous and messy, and we'll see perhaps violence on the streets, perhaps there will be clashes, perhaps there will be casualties, at the end of which hopefully the Iranian people will be able to overthrow that oppressive regime and then chart their way forward in a way that they decide without the oppression of this fundamentalist regime. I'm hopeful that that will bring many good things for the future, for the brave and very talented Iranian people, for the region, for Iraq, for Yemen, for Lebanon, for Syria, for many other places where the Iranians interfered and destabilized, and of course for Israel. All of our enemies are supported directly by the Islamic Republic. So for Israel, it would be a significant game changer that our main enemy will be weakened.
And right now, we're getting this post coming in from Jennifer Griffin over at Fox News. She says, per a U.S. official, the airstrikes will last not hours, but days. Also, no casualties from strike targeting U.S. base in Bahrain. So wanted to ask you about that, because we're not just talking about hours of campaigns by the U.S. and Israel. We're talking about days. Is that what you would have expected? Not short term, but longer term?
I think it'll be more than that, actually. I think we should work under the assumption that it'll take more than days. And, I think it'll boil down to a question of whose offense will work best. Will Iranian offenses, as in firing ballistic missiles, be strong, or will US and Israeli efforts to mitigate Iranian offensive capabilities win? So far, judging by the amount of missiles that the Iranian regime has been able to fire, it doesn't seem as if they're doing too well. And I think that offensive efforts by the US and Israel are so far quite successful, but we'll have to wait and see. And I think we should anticipate, and that's what Israelis are anticipating, that this will take at least days, if not more than that.
All right. Jonathan Cornricus, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and to break this all down.
Thank you.
Anything else that you want to add? Anything we missed here before I let you go?
Well, I can just send my warmest sympathies to the Iranian people. I've been getting a lot of messages from Iranians outside of Iran and inside of Iran, expressing their joy and excitement that finally the day has come where the Iranian people have gotten external help to get rid of the oppressive regime that has been controlling Iran for 47 years. And I think that is where focus will be. A lot of people will try to spin this story into something that it isn't. And I think what we are witnessing may be the end of the Islamic regime and a new page in the long, illustrious, and beautiful history of the Iranian nation. I hope that will happen. If it happens, that will be a really important part of President Trump's legacy, a legacy of peace through strength, a legacy of actually standing up against oppressors and bullies and different fundamentalist regimes, and actually putting his money where his mouth is, and or the opposite, the money where the mouth was, and actually doing what was promised. So I'm hopeful, and I hope that the Iranian people will emerge victorious from this.
All right. Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.